This is Pete Moore on Halo Talks. I have the pleasure of bringing in from Texas, Alex, coming in from Cultivate Advisors. If you don't know about him and his firm, you are going to learn what they do, how they can help you exponentially build your business, potentially save your business, and put you in strategic growth mode. So, Alex, we had a good conversation originally, so welcome to your first Halo Talks.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So why don't you start off, give your background and kind of, take us through the trajectory that got you here to be, an advisor and not, a business builder on your own.
Certainly, yeah. I started my professional career in institutional finance, investment banking, risk analysis. Found there was too much red tape, kicked out, went in a different direction, explored health and fitness as a field. Ended up doing business planning for a large corporate-owned top-down organization. Felt like I wanted to break out further. I wanted more freedom and autonomy, so I went fully entrepreneurial, buying my first of 3 gyms at that point. Did the solopreneur, small business thing, still do it today. In the midst of that, I re-entered the financing world. I got into private equity and then franchise space, which was the culmination. And after I moved away from that type of implement, again, all top-down type of businesses, I thought I was going to be an entrepreneur forever, but I was reached out to by Cultivate, and we only hire people who have 10 plus years of business ownership experience to be advisors, because we want to come from a place of practical application as well as theoretical application. So I found a sweet spot for myself.
That's great. So, when you take a look at, I don't think people fully appreciate the benefits of going through investment banking and private equity and the ability to see so many different companies and business models and kind of look at an Excel sheet and then look, what's really going to happen. Talk about kind of how you kind of morphed yourself into and got better at helping businesses, because, here's your projection model. And let me tell you how this is really going to play out.
Yeah. The phrase I like to use is peeking around corners, right? In any type of advisory position, and that could be outside of business, by the way, right? That could be doctors do pattern recognition all the time, right? And they've honed their pattern recognition skills over scales of disease and patients and so forth. The same thing applies. The broader your perspective is, the better you will be able to form commonality and pattern recognition skills around that. So saying, hey, I've seen how the big boys play. I've seen how the little ones play. I've seen how the winners, the losers, various intentionalities have walked these notions out. I can say, A, B, and C common factors. This is what I think is likely. What are we doing to address these problems? How can we, quote unquote, peek around these corners?
So when you get involved in certain companies, and I find this, in our business, and we're looking at certain KPIs, I look at the health club chain, I'll look at square feet per member. I'll say, okay, look, you got a lot of capacity, and then I'll go look at their, marketing line, and I'll say, not that much of a mystery, but you don't spend enough money on, having the door swing open. A lot of companies who are entrepreneurial, might need some capital to pull that off. So how do you kind of go into companies and say, hey, look, this is what you need to do? Either got to, rebalance how much money you're spending in certain areas, or just trust me, you might go light on corporate overhead and you got to put that money into marketing. And, that trust me moment where it's okay, I'm going to, not just take this guy's PowerPoint and, some nice Zoom calls and, some visits, but this guy has a blueprint and I'm going to go down this line. So how do you think through that, and how does that kind of evolve? Obviously, every deal's different.
Totally, yeah. And the big thing, the common factor is quantification, right? Differing industries, owners and executives, scales, values, mission, vision, values. Those all are very real, and there's tremendous variance. But one of the common factors is that you can quantify any business, and you should. And so few people do. So at point of entry, that's the first couple of hours that I spend with anybody, whether they are a prospect, a solopreneur, a CEO, and so forth, right? What are the inputs? What are the outcomes? How do we track trends, seasonality, averages? How does this same trend scale? Can we 10x this? Or are we going to implode? When do we have to worry about capacity and growth interacting? And so forth. And so to answer your question, what I like to do is ground all of these bigger ethereal notions of what a business is in numbers, in data, and say, okay, does the multiplication, does the addition, does the subtraction, does the exponential factors, do all that, does that line up to accomplish the actual goals? And then to your point, the aha moments come where, oh, here's a gap between those two. How are we going to solve it? Are we going to spend more marketing dollars? Are we going to hire somebody internal, outsource, etc.?
So when you look at companies, and this is something I get across to a lot of people, unfortunately, it's kind of a dose of cold water on them. They might have like 10 clubs, or they might have 5 studios, and I ask them, I've said this many times, which one's the prototype, or which one are you most proud of, or which one's like has a special sauce, and they're like, the 11th one will be that one. And I'm like, well, why don't you get out of these leases, or maybe going backwards might be the path forward. How have you seen that, and how have you kind of talked to entrepreneurs out of like, let's grow from here, why don't we back up and figure out like what this business means, what's the DNA of it? How have you approached those types of situations?
Definitely, yeah. There's a story in one of my favorite books, and it's about, and God bless these people, it's about some firefighters out in the California wildfires, and there was a tale about who survived and who didn't, of the firefighters who were dropped in to do some really intensive firefighting, and there were these well-trained individuals that got overtaken on foot by fire because they wouldn't put down their saw. Right? They were running and they couldn't run with their saw fast enough. And the moral of the story is, even if you're trained in a tool, and even if you think that tool is your lifetime or lifeline, it's a good number of instances where you got to drop your tools and run. Like, you got to pick up new ones. And that's kind of that's a representation of how I communicate these things. Like, we need to, through that quantification process, figure out what is dead weight. Is there a ceiling somewhere that we keep bumping ourselves into? If yes, we got to shed that. And to your point, which one's the prototype, the next one? If that's the case, then you can't hang on to all of them forever. You have to be agile enough to pick up the backlink in the chain as well and move.
So with Cultivate, or with your practice specifically, talk to us about how an engagement starts. Obviously you need some time for, quote unquote discovery. I need some time on the ground. People probably have to have access. You have to have access to, more than just the CEO, because, you're getting one perspective. So how do you kind of go in there and do like a full court press, and then kind of digest that and come out the other side?
Definitely. Yeah. We normally work with businesses that have 2+ years of operation or operating data, and we're optimizers. Right? So we need to see the financials. We need to see widget calculations. We need to see the outreach plans. We need to see expense reports and so forth. So that the point of entry, how an engagement starts, is getting some of that data, letting me chew on it, then meeting with whoever the key strategic players are. Again, I have clients that are solopreneurs. So I don't need to meet with anybody but the CEO. We have clients that are huge, multi-hundred, up over 1,000 headcount. So, who I meet with is variable, but it's more so looking at the data, tracking trends, making some assumptions, and checking with the strategic players as to whether those assumptions are correct, close to correct, undefined, dead wrong, right? Like whatever it may be, and kind of feeling out the walls of the sandbox that we're going to play in. And one of the things that I take tremendous pride in is I know who I can help, but I also know who I can't help. And a good number of people I meet with, I'm like, look, you don't need an advisor. You need X other solve, right? You may need a different solve there.
One of the things that I find when I go on, discovery on a client, I'll go tour their clubs, I'll go, go through their financials, and then they're quick to say like, well, what do you think? What would you do? And I'm like, I got to tell you, man, like, I got to let this like sink in. I got to digest. It might be 3:00 in the morning, like a week from now, that I figure out like what this business should be or what you thought it was that it isn't and where you need to focus on. So how do you, articulate that without them thinking that you're on to the next deal, which some people think that I'm on, but I'm not. The aha moment just hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. I tell everybody I am an incumbent thinker. So to your point of 3 a.m. a week later, right? I'll put it in there. I'll think about it. I'll roll it around, polish that rock a little bit and come out. How do I communicate that is custom solutions, right? I could make any company look like the average pitch deck from,
Right.
you know what I mean? But there's so many more qualitative variables like mission, vision, value, or whatever the end goal of the founder CEO is, right? Is your ultimate realization of this enterprise to take a 6-month sabbatical in Mykonos? Is it to put your kids through college? Is it to use charitable exploits in the company to feed 1,000 people? Whatever that is, right? That it takes a long time to fit that to a revenue model, to fit that to an org chart and an expansion plan. And so without those goals, we're just doing vapid mathematics. That's boring and silly. And so I communicate it in personal values, personal outcome.
So, as you go onto these projects, there's a lot of consulting firms out there that have, big names and charge big prices, drop, a PowerPoint deck that's, it's formatted beautifully, like it looks awesome. But then they're off to the next deal. So, once you kind of come up with these points of like, this is where you need to take the business, are you guys kind of like fully engaged where you're like, hey, I'm going to take this, I'm going to turn this into an action plan. I'm going to be kind of like your conciliary for a period of time. And then when I'm ready to leave, and we've accomplished our mission, you're going to know, and I'm going to know. And that's when the engagement ends.
Something like that. Yeah. I firmly believe, and this goes for all other industries as well, any coach that's worth their salt makes their clients or subscribers or whoever autonomous without them, right? Like if you always needed your basketball coach to know how to shoot a free throw, that's not a very good basketball coach, right? Eventually you know how to shoot a free throw on your own. And so we do kind of put parameters on that at the beginning of the engagement, but it's pretty open-ended because who knows how these things walk out in practice. But yeah, one of the big differentiators from the larger consulting companies that you mentioned is we do our proposals and contracts based on scope of work, not on time, because we don't want to say, hey, this task took me 45 extra minutes, that'll be $200, right? We want to figure out what's needed, put a price tag on it, and then do the work. We are implementers. And so that having a list of deliverables in the initial proposal and then making sure that I get those deliverables done, not I work the amount of hours that we agreed on, is a big differentiator in our service versus that of others that I've seen.
Gotcha. So give us either, whether it's a name or no name example, in the Halo sector of, every project's an ideal project that you decide to work on, but give me an idea. So if somebody's on this audience on this call, on this podcast, they'll say, okay, I've got a similar type of situation where I'm like 20 studio location. I'm trying to put together a franchise disclosure document. I've got 50 franchises. I want to go to 100. I kind of hit, my own ceiling of what I can do here. Give it a vitamin company, give us something.
Mm-hmm. So my favorite example, there's I will leave these anonymous just for good measure, sure. But there's an example, large fitness conglomerate, several different brands franchised together. I work with 3 of their multi-unit franchisees, and all of them have reached the colloquial ceiling that you have talked about, right? Okay. You can it's feasible and accessible to expand from 1 to 3 to 8 to 15 units. But at some point, almost everybody I've talked to has realized, like, man, I am working way too many hours. Nobody signs up to own a business because they're like, please, God, let me work 80 hours a week, right? Like nobody's begging for that. And those are the people that I help. Is
Gotcha.
they kind of have that, excuse my French, they have that oh shit moment of like, man, I've purchased the rights to 12 studios, I've opened 7, and I don't have another second to give. And I was actually watching a prior episode of yours, Halo Talks, when you said, "Oh, do you want to go to your kids' little league games? Do you want your family to be mad at you for missing holidays?" And those are the people that I can help, the hustlers who have hit their time ceiling and want to
Yeah.
expand.
Now I was just on a conference call where a guy called, says he wants to sell his clubs. I asked him why, and he said, I got a 13-year-old son who's an awesome athlete. I'm not missing it. I'm not missing anything anymore. And that's what hopefully, this pandemic has done to people, is wake up and say, like, what's your priorities? How much money do you need to make? And, what do you really, what's your return on time? It really comes down to that. So, tell us a little bit more on not just you, but like, what's the size of Cultivate? What cities are you guys present in? Obviously everything's kind of, over Zoom, and you can, Southwest yourself to anywhere, but where's your strong spots in industries, outside of just Halo?
Definitely, yeah. So Cultivate, we have advisors physically located in the US and Canada. There's just under 60 of us. And we have clients on 4 continents now, which
Okay.
is really exciting.
Awesome.
We position ourselves as industry agnostic. And because each of us has significant time as an entrepreneur in various fields, the degree of specialization in industry and scale is really varied across our team. But I will say that we tend to be really strong in just about every franchise system. The 2 guys that founded the company, Dan Grauman and Casey Clark, come from a large franchise system, and they modeled the business after franchise support for businesses within and without the franchise umbrella.
Gotcha.
As far as industry goes, I think we are most present in professional services, attorneys, CPAs, tax strategy, financial services, and so forth. But again, that's tremendously varied based on the
Gotcha.
events. Our biggest geographic locations are Chicago, Vancouver, Austin, Texas, and Denver.
Gotcha. Just before we close out here, a lot of companies come to us and say, I'm thinking about converting into a franchise, but I don't want to pay the 6% of revenue, franchise fee. And, I used to kind of look at it and say, okay, what's the P&L look like? How much room do you have? And now I kind of toggled to the point where I'm like, look, for 6%, you got $10 million of revenue. Now, let's just say it's less. Let's say it's $5 million of revenue, 6%, 300 grand. You basically get like 50 people that wake up every day, and you're basically, renting their corporate overhead. Now tell me if that 300 grand sounds like a lot of money to have like a CMO, a CFO, a COO, people in the, marketing department, SEO optimization, lead gen, like you can't buy 300 grand. They won't work for you. 2, you couldn't afford it. 3, you'd have, turnover that you have to retrain people. So what's your view just on brands and franchise, systems?
Oh man, I'll say that franchising's sexy from the outside, right? Like a lot of kind of startup or small business owners, I find, romanticize franchising, right? Because they think like, oh, we can turn this into McDonald's, right? And go global quickly with limited management and responsibility and so forth. And to your point, Pete, I think that there are much more substantial barriers to entry than are perceived by the average like small business owner. And the counterpoint, however, is that you look at today, more than half of marriages end in divorce, but that doesn't mean marriage is a bad idea, right? It doesn't mean franchising is a bad idea, but it's hard, and it's harder than people expect, and it requires
on the franchisor side. You're saying,
yeah,
to actually manage a network. Yeah, 100% agree with that.
Yeah,
I'm saying if you've got a great franchisee that's backed by private equity, and for a franchisor that's that provides all the services that they technically say that they're going to provide, it might be a good idea to be a franchisee or an area developer. But I agree with you, if you get caught in like the wrong 10-year agreement, you just like counting the days to de-identify, right? I got you on that.
Yeah. So you're saying my advice to somebody who's looking to be like a bigger multi-unit franchisee.
Right. Instead of like, setting up, Alex's, cycling, maybe going under, a cycling brand, or, Alex's Pilates. You might want to go to Club Pilates. You might want to go to, Solidcore or something like that. Might be beneficial, might not. It's just an interesting question given, all the different PCI compliance and, cost of marketing and, safety in numbers and brand building, that's an interesting. That's going to become more and more of a business decision and financial decision, I think, going forward.
Yeah, totally. Okay. Yeah. So I understand now. And I would root my answer to that question in the personal values and interests of the owner, right? Does the owner want to develop branding? Is the owner really interested in that? Is the owner really interested in developing a team and creating internal cohesive messaging and values in an organization? Or are they looking for a manual on how to do that? Are they looking for people to directly do that for them, right? And so the cost benefit based on want, in my opinion, is the most important factor there.
Good point.
And
Good point.
Access to capital, everybody, capital is accessible, right? In various stages and elements and scales. But more so, is it going to suck the life out of you to do this on your own? If yes, then you should pony up, pay a little extra for some support, and marginalize your profit by paying that franchise fee, right?
Fair point.
And so again, it goes back to our methodology and my own beliefs of like custom, the person behind it. Is the person gonna lean into this or run away from it?
Got it. So in closing here, give us a business quote or a word of wisdom or something that you typically say that people remember you for.
One of my favorite books is called Range by David Epstein. Have you read it?
I'm not.
Awesome book. It's about generalism and how that plays across the business landscape. And he quotes a famous historian called Arnold Toynbee, and the quote is, "No tool is omnicompetent. You have to have a varying arsenal of tools, and you have to be able to know when to use them." His whole book is based on the diminishing returns of specialization and the benefit of generalism and being able to exist in between the specialists and intuitively plug them and their knowledge in at the appropriate times. Because when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? But you've got to know when to use the hammer and the drill and the saw and so forth.
All right. Well, we're specialists, meet generalists, so let's do some business together.
Let's do it.
Let's build a halo sector, and the more entrepreneurs that are successful, the more money that comes in, and the more people that change their lifestyle. So it's great talking to you. Look forward to seeing you in person. And this is good stuff. So look, when you got to all the audience out there, we got a problem and you need it solved. Don't think it's just going to pop into your head at 3 o'clock in the morning. Leave that to us, and we'll get you on the right trajectories. Good stuff.